What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to another episode of the QHTC Track Life. My name is Michael Montgomery, head coach and founder of the Quarter Horses Track Club. And if you are new to the channel, then please be sure to hit the like and subscribe button so you can follow along as we journey through the 2023 track season. In the last episode, we started working on the float. For those who aren't aware, floating does not mean slow down. Say it with me. Floating does not mean slow down. To me, floating is probably the most important skill in track and field. And the reason why is because an average human can only accelerate up to 60 meters. After that, you start slowing down. So unless you only run indoor and you only run the 60 or the 55 meter dash in indoor, if you run any outdoor events, there's some component or there's some part of that race or percentage of that race, any race that you run, that you're essentially slowing down. And so understanding sprint maintenance or understanding how to float is a critical component in every race in outdoor track and field. Floating is the most important the floating is the most important skill, but it's also probably the most difficult skill to teach. And the reason why is because there are physiological changes that happen in the body. When a person floats well, you really can't see a transition between their sprint phase and their float phase. And because it's more physiological than it is physical. In some cases, especially for newer athletes, newer top-level athletes, you may see a small transition, but you shouldn't see a dramatic transition between a person floating and a person sprinting. That's why I say floating does not mean slow down. Every float phase is always preceded by a sprint phase. And the reason why is because by definition, a float means maintaining or just kind of coasting along. So you want to be able to coast along and maintain the speed of whatever that transition that was prior to that float, which is typically a sprint phase. You can't float going slow. Like you can't run slow and then float because you're already running slow. So a float is always preceded by a sprint phase. Floating is all about sprint maintenance. The human body can only accelerate up to 60 meters. So after 60 meters, everybody is slowing down. So the goal of any race that is beyond 60 meters is essentially to slow down slower than everybody else.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
Let me repeat that. You want to slow down slower than everybody else. So what that means is that everybody is slowing down. You just want to do it slower than everybody else. And that is where sprint maintenance comes in. Sprint maintenance and floating are very similar. You want to be able to maintain your speed. Floating is maintaining the speed from the phase that was prior to your float phase, which is always a sprint phase. But float is also one of the most difficult skills to teach because it is physiological and because it's not visual to a coach has to rely heavily off the athlete's input. And for athletes so young in their training maturity, they might not understand the dynamics that go into floating. Floating, a lot of coaches teach floating multiple ways. Some of them, to me, is not the correct way. Like, you don't want to overstride, you don't want to stride, and you don't want to lengthen your stride in order to cover more ground, because that actually makes you more inefficient in running. You want to maintain the correct posture. You just want to continue to keep your legs moving, but you want to be able to relax your arms. But relaxing does not mean slow down. It just means stop trying to generate power using your arms. But again, it is a physiological change and not necessarily a visual change. So it's very difficult for a coach to actually teach it. And it's very difficult, especially for athletes newer to training or with a low training maturity to actually be able to process what the body needs to do in order to accurately float. Again, sprinting is critical. Being able to float is a critical skill set in the athlete's toolkit. And if you haven't learned it, I suggest you learn it because for any race that extends beyond the 55 meters or the 60 meters, so unless you're an indoor runner, an indoor specialist who only runs the 55 and 60 meters, it is critical that you understand the float phase. But that's it for this week. See you on the next episode. And until then, peace.
Get your last money. It's all going to be a stone gas, honey. I'm Don Cornelius. And as always in parting, we wish you love and peace.